Welcome, my tree loving friends. Today we're having another edition of Corrective Pruning for Young Trees, where we believe that trees pruned in the formative years, 1 through 5, have improved health, shape, and avoid costly surgery later. Previously, we discussed why we prune and pointed out some common defects that occur in trees when they're neglected. In today's section on how we prune, we'll continue to show some common tree defects, but with a focus on how to actually make a proper pruning cut. There's a saying, if you want a beautiful garden, remove everything that is not a beautiful garden. And so it goes with trees. If you want a beautiful tree, remove those things that are not an enhancement to its beauty and its health. It is generally thought that the strongest tree structure consists of a dominant central trunk with branches that do not overcompete with the main trunk. This structure is said to have a strong central leader. So our three-step approach is to identify the leader, identify the competition to the leader, and to remove or reduce the competition. Remove or reduce the competition. In order to help develop a strong central leader through pruning, we must first take some time to observe the existing branch structure by walking around the tree from a distance and by looking right up the tree trunk from below. The tree's vascular system is responsible to deliver nutrients to all parts of the tree. So in essence, all parts of the tree are in competition with each other. Branches that grow to a diameter near the size of the main trunk will divert nutrients from the main trunk and will become codominant and increase the risk of splitting apart. They say competition is good for business, but if you're the leader, you want to remain the leader. Branches should radiate from the trunk in all directions, around the trunk and up and down the trunk. Smaller and crowded branches may need to be removed to direct growth to selected, stronger, scaffold branches. It's all about finding the right balance. So now that we have identified the competition, let's talk about how to remove the competition. We neither want to leave a stub cut or a flush cut. To avoid this, we'll need to observe the branch attachment. A well-attached branch will form a branch collar and a branch bark ridge. If you observe closely, the tree will reveal exactly where to make your cut. We are now ready to make our cut just beyond the branch collar where the branch narrows. This results in a smaller wound. There are also naturally occurring chemicals in the tree tissue at the collar to promote healing. Be careful not to remove the branch collar. Some trees will have smooth bark at the branch attachment point with no distinct collar. But remember, no flush cut, no stub cut. You may want to pause the presentation and study this diagram. When observing the branch attachment, we may also come across included bark, along with a narrow crotch angle. Included bark indicates a weak attachment that is prone to failure. It's advisable to remove these weakly attached branches before they become codominant branches, or before they fail in wind or snow events, or due to rot at the split. This cut is made lower than might be expected. For the purposes of pruning young trees, smaller branches are typically removed with a single cut. The two-cut method is good for medium-sized branches to prevent the falling branch from peeling back the bark. The three-cut method is used by certified arborists when cutting large branches with a chainsaw. Okay, let's pause for a little review. So far we've covered identifying the leader, identifying the competition to the leader, and removing the entire branch at the trunk. Next we're going to cover reducing the competition, where the entire branch is not removed, but it is suppressed. When we reduce the branch competing with the main trunk, our objective is to slow down its growth. This will allow the central leader access to more nutrients and to have better access to the top of the canopy and sunlight, thus increasing the growth of the main trunk and suppressing the growth of the competing branch. So, suppressing the branch growth will do two things. It will prevent the subordinate branch from becoming a co-dominant stem, and it allows the central leader to access more sunlight. This technique can also be used to clean out a very dense canopy with many crossing branches. The goal is to shorten or reduce the competing branch to a subordinate capable of maintaining redirected growth. The remaining smaller branch should be at least 1/3 the diameter of the parent branch to ensure the circulatory system is not interrupted. You might say that pedestrian and vehicular traffic are also in competition with the tree's growth habit. We must decide on the clearance needed and raise the canopy in accordance. Branches that are allowed to grow below the ultimate permanent canopy are referred to as temporary branches. When trees are grown in the nursery, temporary branches are managed in a way to improve the taper of the tree. A tree should generally get larger towards the base of the trunk. A tall, narrow stem with no discernible taper is said to be weaker. Temporary branches are usually removed by the nursery before delivery to the customer. However, once our trees are planted in the streetscape, we may still have to manage temporary branches as the tree matures. Keeping temporary branches small will avoid a large pruning wound upon their final removal. When pruning very young trees, we are dealing with smaller secondary branches with buds along its length. When reducing a secondary branch, we'll prune at a bud facing the direction we want the new growth to grow. Again, it's important to get that cut at just the right point to avoid a stub or by being too close to the bud and damaging it. Sometimes we may come across a tree that has been topped on purpose or by accident. An urban street tree that has been severed by a vehicle will often sprout from the stump with lots of adventurous stems. Over time, we can attempt to develop a new central leader by identifying the best new growth and reducing the other branches. Being careful not to remove too much foliage as the tree attempts to recover. Developing a new, strong branch structure may require corrective pruning across many years. Sometimes I like to describe my pruning efforts to the curious observer as simply giving the tree a little haircut. So my final fine-tuning cuts are usually to remove drooping branches. We like our new growth to take place up in the canopy and not from small branches dangling in our face. Our initial assessment before starting to prune a particular tree is to observe the volume of the entire canopy, keeping in mind there is a limit to how much of the live foliage that can be removed. I like to put the branches in a pile for comparison as to not exceed the maximum pruning dosage. You may not be able to correct 10 years of neglect in one pruning session, but consider returning next year for further adjustment. A common question is, when is the best time to prune? With a few exceptions, pruning can take place any time the weather permits. Pruning during the growing season and while dormant both have their advantages. The pruning of urban street trees continues year-round. However, if in your backyard you have the convenience of waiting until the ideal time, identify your species and do some research on the best time to prune. Also check to see if oak wilt is prevalent in your area. A close examination and study of these before and after diagrams will provide a deeper understanding of optimal structural development for large shade trees. While much of what we discussed today relates to shade trees in the landscape and the desire to develop a strong central leader, we must also recognize that some trees have an opposing growth habit. It is that of an open center. This is common among small ornamental varieties. However, our technique to remove or reduce the competition will still apply, except now the goal is to keep the center of the tree open. This is accomplished by simply removing the many crossing branches that often developed. We must recognize a tree's normal growth habit and structure and thus prune accordingly. So that completes today's session on how we prune. I'd like to invite you all to visit and like my Facebook community page at We Care Tree Care for more tree care tips.